Hey everyone, it's cold out there. Stay warm. I apologize. This week, I guess we're gonna have like two lectures, really, right? We've got the first two chapters of the book. I think it's gonna take a bit to get sort of going in the course, but like most weeks we'll have just one of these videos. It just made sense to sort of split this into two separate things. You also notice I've got that bonus lecture, right? So there's an intro ethics class you could take before this, right? Which would delve into like all these different ethical theories and meta ethics and moral psychology and go quite into depth into those things. None of that's necessary for this course, but it's sort of interesting background material somebody might want to have when they start thinking about ethics from the perspective of philosophers. So I posted that for you. I mean, there's this other stuff too. I mean, you might want to talk about what is philosophy and like what kind of things do philosophers do to solve problems and think about things. I'll bring a bunch of that stuff up as we go along too, but again, those are like if you find this interesting and you want to do more our intro philosophy courses, any of them in the informal logic course, that those would be the kinds of things they would focus on, is what exactly is philosophy and how do philosophers do stuff. I should say, and I'll say this again when we meet in person, in philosophy, we talk a lot about really controversial subjects, right? Like that's just philosophy, especially in an ethics class. And what philosophers are doing is they're looking at the theories we have about the world, and we're looking at the arguments we use to support our theories, right? So in philosophy, anything goes to a certain extent. We just have to remember we have to respect each other, right? You're going to read things, you're going to hear things, you're going to have people defend views that you might find really false, perhaps even offensive. And that's okay in a philosophy class. What we're looking at is what is the actual position somebody believes and why do they believe it? What kind of arguments can they offer in favor of that? Sometimes we can have a position that is maybe true, but we have a really bad argument in support of that, and that's not good, right? Like you want arguments that are as compelling as possible, not from a rhetorical standpoint, not something that's sort of manipulative and persuasive in the way you might find in a communication studies class or even a business class. Philosophers aren't in the business of selling you things. What you're trying to do in philosophy is trying to make the strongest possible argument from the perspective of logic, right? Something where what you're saying might actually end up being true. It's a bad thing when you have when you don't really have a good argument for what you believe, right? Because then what that demonstrates is I don't have much logically compelling evidence that what I think is the case is actually true. And if you don't have good arguments for your opponents, like positions that you think are just obviously false, well, it's probably the case that you don't understand where your opponents are coming from, right? What we're doing in philosophy is we're trying to raise the bar. We're trying to say, here's the best possible argument for my position, and here's every single objection against what I believe. Here's all the reasons why I might be wrong. And likewise for my opponents, here's all the problems with their view. And here's the best argument they can offer in defense of themselves. What we do when we do that, right, is we raise the level of public discourse, right? Like if you can say, look, this is the best argument my opponent could give themselves, and yet their view's still false, that's much, much more interesting than if you misrepresent what your opponent believes and you just say, hey, look, yeah, given this stupid thing that I just presented, my opponent's obviously wrong. Well, that's not interesting. You've just shown the weakest version of your opponents are wrong. Who cares? So that's what we're doing in philosophy, right? It's we're trying to understand each other. And we're trying to give arguments that support our position. Excuse me. We've got two chapters this week. I'm going to try to go through these at a reasonably fast pace so you don't have to listen to me talk for hours. And again, most weeks we're going to be looking at like one. First chapter, why do good people do bad things? There's a lot of interesting stuff in here. I think the two most important things that you need to focus on, the ultimatum game and why our author thinks is really important to thinking about ethics, and what he has to say about ethical relativism. I should say before we start a little bit about moral philosophy. Now I posted that video from The Good Place at the start of class, right? And they go, look, you know, for thousands of years, philosophers have developed these views on morality, and there's really three main views. For our purposes in this class, there's going to be four main views of ethics. There's lots of other ways people have thought about ethics. Again, intro philosophy course would go into this kind of stuff in a ton of detail. For the purposes of this class, we want like just a broad sort of, here's the ways people think about ethics typically, and this is how we approach moral problems. Again, we're trying to think about them rationally, right? We're trying to say, here's a theory that gives us reasons to think something is true or false. In the case of morality, here's a theory that gives us reason to think certain things are right or wrong. Ways people think about ethics. There's what we call consequentialists. Most common type of consequentialist is somebody called a utilitarian. Consequentialist just says morality is about bringing about good results in the world, right? Like, why would you care about morality if it didn't do anything, right? Like, it might be all well and good to say something like, well, we should respect other people, we should be kind, we should be just, we should be fair. But if that didn't have any actual impact on the world, like if treating people kindly didn't do anything, right? Why would you care about morality? What the consequentialist says is morality is about impact in the world. The right thing to do is always the thing that brings about the best result, right? I'm trying to maximize utility, maximize happiness, maximize overall wealth or welfare in the world. And so what do? I'm faced with a moral dilemma. Save as many people as possible, bring about the best result. That's what the utilitarian or the consequentialist says, right? We want to know what we should do, focus on the consequences of our actions, and do the thing that's going to produce the best. Simple enough. Deontologists. These people flip things. They say morality is not about sort of bringing about the best result or producing as much happiness as possible. What it is to live morally is to live so that you are worthy of happiness. It's to recognize what reason dictates about how we ought to live, and it's guiding your actions based upon the dictates of reason. So it's doing things for the right reason. I'm not saving you. Like if you're in danger, I'm not saving you because, well, that's a good result, right? I'm not like, oh, I should help that person in need because that would produce more happiness in the world. The deontologist says that's the wrong reason to help. The reason I help you is because I recognize that you're a person and you have intrinsic value. You're an end in and of yourself. You're the kind of thing that's worth caring about. So for the deontologist, morality is about recognizing the things that actually have value in this world, which is typically a person, right? Persons are ends in and of themselves for the deontologist, as opposed to a means, right? Like you think about your car. Your car doesn't have any intrinsic worth. Your car is valuable because you care about it. It's because it's your thing. So the real value of your car isn't that the car is important. It's the car belongs to you, and you are a person, you matter, right? Deontologists say, look, this is the starting point of morality. We are rational, free agents. And because of that, we are infinitely more valuable than a rock or a car because we're persons. The morality is about respecting the persons. It's about recognizing each and every one of us has intrinsic dignity, and that out of that dignity comes a bunch of rules for how we should behave towards each other. I should be fair to you. I should be just. I should treat you kindly. I should care about your needs, and you should care about mine. I should treat you as a person, not as a thing. And then out of that comes a bunch of rules and procedures for how we should behave towards each other, says the deontologist. So I help you when you're in need, not to maximize good result, but because you're a person and you need help. And morality would dictate that I ought to care. That's what it means to be a deontologist. Morality is grounded in respect for persons and the reasons that come out of that. Third main approach to morality is what we call a virtue ethicist. Virtue ethics, what they say is, look, morality is not an externally faced thing. It's not about sort of bringing about good results in the world. It's not even about recognizing that people matter. Of course, people do matter, but morality is about how we live our lives. And what morality really is the rules or the truths about the world that allow us to live well, right? So virtue ethics goes back in the Western tradition to Aristotle, and the Eastern tradition, you look at Confucius, and there's lots of virtue ethics traditions all around the world. And what all the virtue ethicists sort of have in common is they say, look, there's ways to be excellent, or there's ways to live so that you'll be a good person. What do they mean by that? Well, think about anything that's built for a purpose. Again, let's go back to our car. What makes a car good? Well, a car is good if it can drive from point A to point B, right? And then it's got to do all this other stuff. It's got to survive through, like, the Alberta winters that are, freezing everything right now, right? If you got a car that can't stand -20 weather, well, that's a pretty useless car in Alberta, right? The purpose of a car is to be able to get you from point A to point B. And then it's got these secondary purposes. It should, not waste too much gas. It should be comfortable. It should be able to survive the kind of climate you live in. And if your car has all those all those features, then functionally, it's a virtuous car. Likewise for people. We have a purpose. We are supposed to be excellent, says Aristotle. What that means is we cultivate all the virtues. We cultivate all the different kinds of character traits that make us into this kind of ideal person. So we are just, we are temperate, we are kind, we are wise, all the kind of things that you might think of as virtues in ancient Greece. That tradition, has a long history, down through the Catholic tradition in the West, right? You think about the 7 cardinal virtues and the 7 vicious sins. That's a kind of virtue ethics, right? You want to be a holy person in the Catholic tradition. Well, you stay away from the vices, right? And you build the virtues, right? Today we see virtue ethics in things like positive psychology, or when people talk about things like well-being, right? What kind of character traits should a person cultivate to be a good version of a human? How do we live well? We build the virtues, right? We focus on health and intelligence and, relationship building and mental health and these kind of things where we take care of ourselves. That's what the virtue ethicist is all about, right? What kind of character traits or habits of being do we need in order to live well? Virtue ethicist says, look, if you cultivate those things, you will be a good person and you will treat others well as well. And that's really what morality is about. It's not sort of figuring out what's the right thing to do. It's how do I be in the world, right? The kind person will probably help somebody in need, not because they go, I'm going to maximize good result, not because they go, oh, you're a free and intelligent agent and I should respect that. They're just like, I'm kind because I'm virtuous and I see you suffering and that bothers me because I'm kind. And so I want to help, right? That's virtue ethics. A really big role in business ethics. So when you think about it, in institutional ethics, we'll talk later, right? But I mean, almost every organization around builds themselves a virtue ethics code, right? Here are our values. Red Deer Polytechnic has values, right? And then you list a bunch of virtues that you think are important for your organization. And then they tell us something about the character, about who you are. Red Deer Polytechnic is an agile, brave organization focused on discovery and empowerment. That's a very different kind of character than a character that is compassionate and kind and wise and, stimulated by art and intellect and the mind, right? Very different kind of business, different kind of virtues. And then finally, I've got a view up here called contractarianism. Those of you that have watched The Good Place, that show, by the end of it, this is the view it ends up defending, is what we call contractarians. Contractarians contract views of morality have a huge role in business ethics as well. And I think that kind of makes sense when you're thinking about organizations and collective action. What a contractarian says is morality is it's a contract. It's not like a written down contract. It's not like we said, okay, here's the contract for how humans are going to behave with each other. It's rather you're rational agents and I'm a rational agent, right? We're both able to reason and deliberate. We have this problem. We have to live in the world with each other. And if we're going to do that, we have to have some sort of rules, or we'll all just kill each other. It goes back to the liberal tradition in Western culture, people like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. And then it comes up through like people like Rousseau, and it's very tied into political philosophy, right? John Rawls is probably the 20th century person that was really much a defender of the contract approach. The idea behind the contractarian is society itself has a set of rules built into it, right? Our society, it's not the laws, it's not the customs. It's just like we're rational agents collectively together. And what morality is these rules that allow us to live together respectfully with each other. They're rules that apply to me and you, provided we recognize that each other is sort of a rational agent buying into the system. So I'm not going to go around and I'm not going to shoot you, for example, because I know you're not going to shoot me, right? I mean, that's not the best example, but I'm not going to do harm to you because and I respect you not to harm me. And because we have this sort of like unspoken agreement with each other, we don't have to be running around worrying that, I'm going to surprise stab you or something like that, because the social contract keeps us respectful of each other, right? That's the basic idea. There's these rules that just sort of govern how we interact with each other. And that's really what morality is. And we buy into those by being a part of a society. So it's a hypothetical contract, but it's one that applies provided you're a member of the society. That's probably enough. I mean, these are simplifications. There's, again, you could take courses and centuries of study on these things. But for our purposes, I think that's enough to get sort of, these are the core approaches to morality. They're mutually exclusive. You can't be like a consequentialist deontologist, right? They'll contradict each other. They'll advise different things. You'll have an intellectually incoherent set of views about the world if you tried to do that. But what these are fundamentally different ways of thinking about morality in the world, right? And probably at least one of these will appeal to you. And when you're thinking about issues like applied ethical issues in like a business setting or in an institutional setting, think about, well, how would a consequentialist think about this? They'd be thinking about consequences. They'd be thinking about results, right? What produces the best result for everybody? What maximizes wealth or something like that? What minimizes harms? What's the deontologist going to do? They're going to think about respect for persons. Who are the stakeholders involved? What are their interests? What should we care about? What do they care about? How do I try to respect them while respecting myself? Right? These are the kinds of things you bring to an ethical problem. All right, so there you go. There's your crash course in morality for the. All right. Now, in our text, he makes a really nice point to start. And I think it's a good point, a good starting point for thinking about morality as it applies to our professional lives or just our lives in general. You get people that are kind of skeptical about ethics having any role in, like, you might say, well, ethics is all nice and good, but that's something for like religious people, or that's like nobody's really ethical when we get out there and interact in the world. It's just like we pay lip service to stuff like this, but really at the end of the day, we're all just selfish and we're all just motivated by our own interest. And anybody that doesn't believe that, just turn on some reality TV and you can watch people backstab each other and just try to get as much wealth as possible out of the game. Those are really artificial situations where people are loaded most of the time, but that's besides the point. Some people have this kind of view of humanity, right, where we're just these selfish, focused creatures where we're always just trying to get one up on each other. And what a government is and what an organization is really a way of curbing all these kind of self-interested tendencies we have to try to sort of make us get along. Kind of a very depressing, nihilistic picture of humanity. But it's an empirical question, right? What kind of animal are we? Are we this selfish, self-centered, agent that only really cares about ourselves, or are we something else? That's a hard question. That's a question in moral psychology. And it has to deal with a lot of empirical data about the way our brains work and the way we behave. And that's not something we're going to answer in a course like this, right? We just don't have the time to do that, right? Well, our text argues is that we are built for ethics, that this view that we are these selfish, self-focused creatures that don't care about anything other than ourselves and definitely don't care about morality, that's just false. And he's going to give you a bunch of examples as we go along, and I'll bring in a bunch as this course goes on. But he's going to say, look, we're the kind of animal that is committed to morality itself. We can't help, most of us at least, can't help but to care about one another and to care about trying to do the right thing. We are, for the most part, we are honest creatures. We don't like lying to each other. We don't like manipulating each other. We don't like, stealing from each other. If we can cooperate, we will. And we feel better cooperating than we do exploiting each other. Most of us feel exploitation is a horrible thing, right? And we feel like shit when we, use someone. And your text says, look, there's exceptions to this. There's some people that really enjoy using others. We call them psychopaths. And then he talks about John Wayne Gacy, right? Says, here's a typical example of the kind of person that's only focused on their own self-interest and doesn't care one way or the other about other people. But they're not a successful human. For the most part, the psychopath is defective and does poorly. There's some complication there. There's a big difference between a serial killer and a psychopath. Most psychopaths are actually successful agents, right? There's lots of statistical data that if you look at the leaders of Fortune 500 companies and successful CEOs, significant number of them are psychopaths. So there's there's a little bit of a simplification there, but the general point, right, is that the vast majority of humans are not like we aren't psychopaths, and we're definitely not like the John Wayne Gacy's of the world, or even the lesser psychopathic agent out there, where most of us, just in virtue of the kind of animal that we are, care about our family and our friends and our coworkers, and we want to cooperate. The text says, look, this is our moral psychology. This is the kind of animal we are. We are simply built for ethics. And so this question, why be moral? Well, the answer is you are, right? You whether you like it or not, you care. And so you don't have to ask that question. Why should I care about ethics? Well, you do. And your life goes better if you understand what the moral demands are on you and why you're committed to it, right? And so he says, don't get confused and try to think that you're this selfish creature, because you're not. You're the kind of animal that's committed to morality.